Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is the simple story of one man and his dog, or maybe one cyborg and his robot dog friend. 4 years have passed since the events of Metal Gear Solid 4, and Raiden is working for the private military company Maverick. Having recently restored the peace to an unnamed African nation, Maverick are now working as a private security firm for the new Prime Minister when they're attacked by Desperado, a rival PMC led by Jetstream Sam and Sundowner. Desperado are attempting to destabilise the nation and cause further wars to erupt in order to make a profit hiring themselves out to the highest bidder. Raiden fails to protect the Prime Minister, losing an eye and an arm in his fight with Jetstream Sam, and barely manages to escape with his life, only being saved at the last minute by his colleagues who show up with rocket launchers. Maverick replaced Raiden's damaged body with an even stronger cyborg body with an all-new paint job, and set him loose to get his revenge on Desperado, as well as foil their plot to create a new business out of war. Compared to titles in the main Metal Gear series, the plot is fairly straightforward and doesn't really have too many twists and turns throughout. Sure, more details are revealed regarding Desperado's scheme involving topics Raiden takes fairly personally, but the basics of get revenge on the dude that took your body parts stays fairly focused. That's not to say there aren't a plethora of cutscenes and codec conversations like we're all used to. The opening of the game in particular felt quite slow with cutscenes or codec sequences after every fight. These codec conversations in particular really slow the game down, as you have to walk at a snail's pace while you listen, which is especially annoying when you reach the door to the next area, or find a collectible and you have to wait for the conversation to end before you can progress. You can skip through these conversations, but that's when you start to lose track of the story, and it shouldn't really be necessary to skip these just to pick up an item or slice a door in half to walk through it. In essence, the codec style of storytelling doesn't work well within a fast-paced hack and slash game compared to the slower-paced stealth game like we're used to.
How is it, Raiden?
So far, so good. I've got a clean visual.
A direct feed to your optic nerve. Yes, I should hope so, huh? I mean, how does it feel? To fly like a bird?
Like a bird strapped to a remote control rocket.
We will get you in safely, Tovarich. Just relax and enjoy the ride.
Right.
The primary mechanic used to differentiate Metal Gear Rising from other hack and slash games on the market is the use of Blade Mode, which gives you free control over your sword slashes using the right analog stick to cut in any direction. The exact way in which it is used depends on the context in which the button's pushed at the time. If you just push the button normally, you'll stand still on the spot and you can slice away like a madman, but you remain vulnerable to attack. If you attack enemies enough to fill your fuel gauge, then when you enter Blade Mode, time slows down, and if the enemy's weak enough, you highlight their weak spot, allowing for a one-hit kill, which also restores both your health and fuel gauges by absorbing their spine juices. Seriously. Against some enemies, once you weaken them enough, the screen flashes blue and you get a special kill sequence which allows you to slice them into small pieces, and each boss has a specific way of using the Blade Mode to defeat them, such as disarming them, weakening them, or just stunning them for a short period to get some free hits in. The Blade Mode is very satisfying, especially when after fighting a particularly tough enemy when you slice them into tiny little pieces, but it can also be a little frustrating at times when you need to be precise. The last boss in particular has a section where you have to slice 3 times in a row in different directions, and if you miss the slash or take too long getting the correct direction, you die unless you're at pretty much full health. This might not be so bad if you didn't have to repeat the sequence at least 3 times throughout the encounter, but repetition seems to be a bit of an issue with the boss fights in general. The boss fights are all fun, and each one offers a different fight focusing on a specific mechanic. Monsoon is largely about parrying quickly in succession or timing them well for a counterattack, whereas Sundowner requires quick and accurate Blade Mode slicing to remove his shield, and the last boss requires quick reactions to various abilities, each with different counters and so on. The only problems I had with them were they all just lasted a little bit too long, and once you had their one mechanic sussed, the fights don't evolve in any way, you just repeat the same tactics over and over while chipping at their health bar. The slicing mechanism aside, the controls are fairly standard for a hack and slash game, with light and strong attacks on separate buttons, and a third button for your alternate weapon. One thing that does feel missing at first though is a dedicated block or dodge button. You can parry from the start by pressing a light attack and towards the enemy at the same time, and you can buy a dodge move via the upgrade system that requires pressing 2 buttons simultaneously. When I first started playing this felt unusual and like a single button for either of these was necessary, but after you spend a little time with it, parrying becomes second nature, and I rarely found myself bothering to use the dodge move on normal difficulty. The only places where the controls do fail a little bit is in the camera, and when you're trying to be stealthy. The camera is god awful, and I found myself constantly fighting against it in every sequence just to try and keep track of the enemies and the environment. The other issue is when you are given the option to sneak around enemies and take them down silently in a number of areas, but the controls just aren't built for it. When you try to walk, you move so slowly that it's painful, and I tended to just give up and run up behind the enemy instead. Stealth is never forced on you, so this is hardly a game breaker, but the stealth sections make a nice change of pace and stop the gameplay from becoming monotonous, so it would have been nice if a bit more time had gone into it. This is also evident in that you gain less upgrade points for a stealth kill compared to general combat, which pretty much discourages you from trying to stealth at all.
I will patrol ahead.
Military cyborg! You are not licensed to operate in this area. You're in violation of state and federal law.
Guess you better arrest me then.
18.3.104.7, threatening a peace officer. Deadly force is authorized.
One really standout aspect of Metal Gear Rising is the soundtrack. Similar to Platinum's previous hack and slash game Bayonetta, the music isn't exactly what you'd expect in an action game, but it works really well regardless. The boss battles are the main example of this, each boss having their own track which starts off as an instrumental, and as they take damage the vocal track comes in. Another area Metal Gear Rising is unusual compared to most games at the moment is it doesn't hold your hand too much. At the very start there is a forced tutorial to explain basic controls such as how the ninja run makes you automatically navigate obstacles and how to parry, but after this you just get a couple of on-screen prompts that can easily be ignored in the already cluttered UI. I didn't find out about Ripper mode, essentially Devil Trigger where you deal much higher damage for a limited time, until the very end of the game, despite numerous on-screen prompts which I only saw when watching through my video footage to make this review. There are optional VR mission tutorials, but you have to leave the main game in order to play these and they're hardly necessary. As well as the training missions, there are also several unlockable bonus VR missions which you can do to gain extra upgrade points to spend in the main game. These missions are basically challenge modes where you have to kill all the enemies in a room, stealth through an area, reach waypoints, only use a specific weapon, and so on, giving you better rewards the quicker you complete them. I've mentioned the upgrade system a few times now without going into too much detail, and that's largely because there isn't much detail to go into. It's a simple case of upgrading health and energy for the most part, with a couple of upgradable moves. In a lesson learned from Mega Man, you gain each boss's weapon after you defeat them, which you have to then buy and upgrade and buy moves for as well. Each weapon only has a handful of techniques though, and you'll probably just pick one weapon and stick with it rather than swapping them out too often. Personally I just use the arm staff you get from the first boss for the rest of the game. Overall, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a game I very much enjoyed despite a couple of flaws. There were a few areas that needed a bit more time putting into them, such as the stealth controls and the weird optional missions that you only get about twice, and are quite literally told to engage if you wish, it's your choice. It is a little short, clocking in around the 5 to 6 hour mark, or 7 to 8 if you're bad at this kind of game like me, but it's definitely worth your time, especially as you won't get Bayonetta 2 unless you own a Wii U.